Hello, this is Mrs. Neill, and this is lesson number 7, review of angles. As we go into chapter 3, we're going to do a review of angles. So if you had me for your geometry class right now, we did chapter 1 and we finished chapter 2. So before we start chapter 3, I want to spend a little bit of time and review angles with you. We did quite a few angles in chapter 1, and I want to go over those again. You really need to have a good grasp of what our angles are before we go into chapter 3. And the angles I want to review are the right angle, acute, obtuse, straight, adjacent, complementary, supplementary, linear pair, and vertical angles. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and start with a right angle. A right angle is an angle that measures exactly 90 degrees. And it looks really like an L. The exact measure of it is 90 degrees. Okay, there's two ways that you can tell. Is if I write that it's 90 degrees, that's one way you know it's a right angle. Or another way to know it's a right angle is if it has the little box, the right angle symbol. So you know that's a right angle and you know that's 90 degrees. Also remember, if I've got perpendicular lines form a right angle also. So you'd have a right angle here, 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 and here. It actually forms 4 right angles. All right, the next angle is acute angle. If you know what a right angle is, now let's go to acute. An acute angle is an angle that measures between 0 and 90 degrees. So if I have a right angle, it's going to be a little bit smaller than the right angle. It's going to be moved in like this a little bit. It's an angle that's between 0 and 90 degrees. So if I took this ray and I made it a little bit, brought it in a little bit, that is an acute angle. So for example, the measure of this angle could be maybe 50 degrees. If it's between 0 and 90, it's an acute angle. The next one is obtuse angle. An obtuse angle is between 90 and 180. So if I take a right angle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it bigger. It's going to be wider. It's going to go out further. It's going to go between 0 and 180. So if I took this ray and opened it up a little bit like that, that's an obtuse angle. Think of obtuse, open. So this angle right here could be, let's say, 130 degrees. As long as it's between 90 and 180, it's an obtuse angle. Next one is straight angle. And a straight angle is the same as a straight line. It measures 180 degrees. So if you draw a straight line, that is a straight angle. You need to know this concept that it's 180 degrees because we're going to use different other angles. For example, supplementary is 180. A linear pair is 180. So using this straight angle concept, we're going to do some other angles in just a minute. All right, now we're down here at number 5, adjacent angles. Adjacent angles have a common vertex and a common side, but they do not share any interior points. So adjacent angles share a common side. So if I drew an angle right here, an adjacent angle would be some other angle that shares the common side. See how this angle and this angle, they share that common side right there. Now, some things to remember. These angles are not necessarily the exact same measure. This angle could be 40 degrees and this angle could be 20 degrees. As long as they share the common side, they're adjacent. Also, adjacent angles are not necessarily inside a right angle. Okay, this is your right angle here. and these happen to be adjacent. If I drew this angle and that angle, those are adjacent, but they're not necessarily the exact same size. This one could be, let's say, 60 degrees, and that could be 30 degrees, as long as they add up to 90. Also, adjacent angles can also be in a line with each other, like this. This angle right here and this angle right here are adjacent to each other because they share this common side right here, but they're not necessarily the exact same measure. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. Let's go to complementary angles now. Complementary angles are two angles whose sum is 90 degrees. Complementary angles can either be adjacent or non-adjacent angles. So, if I have a right angle, and I put two angles inside here, these are complementary because I know that this whole angle right here is 90. And these happen to be adjacent. Let's say again that this one's 60 and this one's 30. Okay, those are complementary angles, but they don't have to be adjacent. They can be non-adjacent. So I could actually have a 60-degree angle over here, and I could have a 30-degree angle over here. Okay, these two angles are complementary. They're not adjacent, but if I add these up, I would get 90 degrees. So complementary angles can either be adjacent or non-adjacent, as long as they sum up to 90 degrees. Next one is supplementary. Same concept applies with supplementary as complementary, except their measures add up to 180. So if I have, I'm going to put a line here. And remember, we said a straight angle is 180. Let's say I'm going to draw an angle off from it. Now I've got two angles. These happen to be adjacent. For example, let's say this one's 120 degrees. Well, this one would be 60 because their sum is 180. Now, these are adjacent angles that are supplementary. Also, you can have non-adjacent angles that are supplementary. So, for example, if I had an angle over here, just off to the side, it's 120. And then I've got another angle over here that's about 60 degrees. Okay, if these two add up to 180, they are going to be supplementary. They're not adjacent, they're non-adjacent, but they're still supplementary angles, even though they're not right by each other. If they add up to 180, they're supplementary. Okay, working on down, we've got linear pair. This is used throughout the whole year, the concept of linear pair. There are two adjacent angles whose non-common sides are opposite rays. The measure of a linear pair is always 180 degrees. So, for example, a linear pair would be like a line. And we know a line, a straight angle, a line is 180 degrees. So let's say that I draw an angle off from it. Okay? They have to be adjacent. So I'm forming a line. These are opposite rays. There's my point there. That's a ray. If I go off this way, that's a ray. So they're two opposite rays. And they're adjacent. They share this common side. So the measure of this angle plus the measure of that angle is going to add up to 180 degrees. Like, for example, if this angle right here is 100 degrees, then this angle would have to be 80 degrees, wouldn't it? The thing about a linear pair, they form a line, and they're a pair of angles within a line, and they do have to be adjacent. Now, a linear pair are also supplementary, aren't they? If the angles add up to 180 degrees, these are also supplementary angles. So our linear pair is also supplementary. Our last term is vertical angles. And this is a term that you're going to use through the rest of geometry. You're going to see this again and again and again. If I have two non-adjacent angles of two intersecting lines, vertical angles are congruent. So I'm going to have two intersecting lines. So I'm going to have one line here, and it's going to intersect with another line right here. Okay, vertical angles are non-adjacent. So it would be this angle, I'm going to call that angle 1, and this angle, I'm going to call that angle 2. Those are adjacent angles. Notice the only thing they share is this end point right here. They're not adjacent. They don't share a side. And they're congruent. So I can say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Now, on the other side, I have another pair, don't I, over here. Now, I'm going to label that with 2 arc marks. And that's angle, let's say 3 and 4. So now, angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. They're the same measure. Now, what else can you say? I'm going to cover this up. Angle 1 and angle 3 form a linear pair, don't they? Okay, so, and they're going to be supplementary. So this angle plus that angle is 180, isn't it? So let's say, for example, I say that this angle is 100 degrees. You can tell me that angle 2, since they're vertical angles, that's 100 degrees also, isn't it? So let me cover this up. This is a linear pair. 1 and 3 are linear. They're supplementary. So if that's 100, 180 minus 100, this is going to be 80 degrees. And now 3 and 4 are vertical angles. So now I can say that angle 4 is 80 degrees also. So that's our concept of vertical angles. I'm Mrs. Neill. That's our lesson for today. Thank you for listening.